Hi folks, HR Funk here. If you've been following my Law Enforcement Firearms Qualification Course series, you know that I've been trying to fire a Law Enforcement Firearms Qualification course from each of the 50 states for the purpose of comparing and contrasting those courses and ultimately trying to determine what I think is the best Law Enforcement Firearms Qualification course in the country. You also know that the series focused on handgun qualification courses, and you probably also know that I recently completed my goal when I fired the West Virginia course, and I have now fired a course from each of the 50 states. And in this video, I'm going to reveal what I think is the best law enforcement firearms qualification course in the United States. Now, throughout the course of completing this series, I have stopped after every 10 qualification courses and done a semifinal round. And in that semifinal round, I've picked what I think was the best qualification course in that group of 10, and that has become one of my finalists. So at this point, I have 5 finalists, and what I have done is gone back through my course evaluation matrix, and I have ranked them in order from number 5 to number 1. I'm also going to include 3 honorable mention courses that didn't make the finalists out of their group, but they're courses that for one reason or another I think are very good, and they're worthy of at least being mentioned in this final video. So what we're going to do is adjourn from the shop here, and we'll reconvene in my office, and I'll fire up the computer and go through the course evaluation matrix, and before it's all said and done, I'll reveal to you what I think is the best law enforcement firearms qualification course in the country. And here we are back in the home office. I've got the trusty iPad fired up, and I've brought up my course evaluation matrix. And if you're not familiar with the way I rate these courses, in each one of my semifinal videos, I've gone back and discussed how it is that I'm rating one course against the next and how I am determining what I think is going to be the best law enforcement qualification course in the country. So if you're not familiar with how I do that, go back and watch those. My very last video, which was the semifinal round for the last group of 10 qualification courses, I again recapped exactly how I do that. I think the most extensive explanation that I had of my system is in the very first semifinal video, so you can go back and look at that and see how I'm rating these courses. And I'm just not going to take the time in this video to go over that again for what would be at least the 6th time. Rather, I'm going to jump right into these courses, and the first one that I'm going to discuss is my first honorable mention course, which is California. The California course was a 50-round course of fire. It had a total of 10 critical shooter skills that were tested, and it really feels like in the California course that there were more skills than that tested because there is so much going on in that course. There's a lot of moving into position. There is drawing with the non-dominant hand, and this is a very, very well-designed course. It's one that I think a lot of time and thought went into, and I think whoever designed the course took some of the things that have happened in actual gunfights and used that to incorporate into this course. And also in the California course, the accuracy standard changes with each stage. So each stage has its own accuracy standard and its own time limit, and shooters are required to pass every stage of this course, which I also think is good. So that way there's not one stage that someone can do poorly on, but as long as they pass the overall course, they still qualify. Again, I think this was a very good course, very well designed by the folks in California. Now, California, as I mentioned when I did that video, does not have a statewide mandatory course that's required for every law enforcement agency in the state. Rather, each agency comes up with its own course. And the course that I demonstrated is one that's used by a large department in California. And again, I think whoever designed that course did a very good job. This course, subjectively, if I was only rating courses on my subjective opinion, I think I would have chosen this as the best course in the country. But based on my evaluation matrix, it came in just a little below the top courses that I had throughout the series. Even so, I wanted to be sure that I mentioned this and give props to you folks in California because, again, this was a very, very good course, and it's one that I think a lot of people who design courses could learn some things from if they would go back and look at the way that course was put together. The next honorable mention course comes from Maine. Maine also uses a 50-round course of fire, And the thing I really liked about the main course is the emphasis in this course is on accuracy rather than time. And the time limits in the main course are used only as a par time, if you will. They are not absolutes. And part of the reason for that, and this is another thing that I like, is officers begin this course fully loaded with their magazines or speed loaders, whichever, fully loaded, and their sidearm fully loaded. And as they shoot their way through this course, they reload wherever that becomes necessary, which is a little bit more realistic than reloading at specific times on specific drills as shooters are working their way through a qualification. And that's one of the reasons that the time limits can't be absolutes, because different officers, depending on the specific sidearm they're carrying and the ammunition capacity of that sidearm, are going to be reloading at different times throughout the course. And for some of these, the time limits are very, very tight. In fact, Maine had an average of 1.71 seconds per shot, which is the tightest time limit out of all of these courses in my final group here. And again, the main course is very, very good. The reason that it didn't rate higher than it did is it has quite a bit of repetition. There, I think, are 4 failure drills in this course throughout the stages. And if some of those failure drills were taken out, or some of that repetition was taken out, and the rounds used currently for those were used for other types of exercises to evaluate other types of critical shooter skills, this course would have rated much, much higher and may have even been the top course in the country. But as it is, with that repetition and continuing to practice those same skills over and over, really took away from the score this course could have received. It has a qualification quotient of 46.78. And again, that is the highest of any of the courses that I have. So if it just evaluated a few more critical shooting skills, this course would have definitely been the top course in the country. But as it is, it comes in as an honorable mention candidate. My final honorable mention candidate comes from Nevada. And again, this is not a statewide mandatory course. Rather, it's a course used by a large agency in Nevada. It is a 50-round course of fire, and this course makes very good use of shooting from different distances. I believe there are stages from 3, 5, 7, 10, 15, and 25 yards, and there is a definite emphasis in the Nevada course on long-range shooting. Of the 50 rounds that are fired, 20 of those rounds, or 40%, take place from 15 yards and beyond. In fact, there are 10 rounds fired from the 15-yard line, and then another 10 rounds, or 20% of the course, fired from the 25-yard line. So very good in terms of determining an officer's accuracy, particularly an accuracy at long distances. The time limits also are very good. They're not so tight that the shooter has to spray and pray, but they're not so relaxed that the officer can just take his or her time and squeeze off the shots, slow fire, and still make the time limits. So again, I think this is another very well put together course. It uses a good challenging target, and it's just a course that, again, if it evaluated a few more critical skills, and truthfully, the Nevada course evaluated 11 critical skills, which was a tie with the course that actually won in that group of 10, which was my last group of 10 courses. And it came down to the qualification quotient in order to break that tie. And the other course had a higher qualification standard. I believe it had an 80% qualification standard, or 85. I don't remember off the top of my head. Whereas the Nevada course only had a 75% qualification standard. So if that was just a little bit higher, the Nevada course may well have made it into one of my finalists. But as it is, that course ended up as the final honorable mention candidate out of this entire group. And we're up to the first of my finalists. This is the course that finished number 5 overall out of all 50 states, and this is the course from Colorado. And one of the significant things about the Colorado course is it is only a 25-round course of fire, but it still tested 11 critical shooting skills. And this demonstrates something that I also showed in the Maryland course, which was my own creation, that you don't have to fire a high number of rounds in order to evaluate a lot of different shooting skills if you design your stages of fire properly. And again, the Colorado course shows that very well. There were 11 critical skills that were evaluated throughout the course of this qualification. It did have a somewhat generous number of seconds per shot in 2.88 seconds per shot. In fact, that is the most generous out of all of this group of finalists that I'm talking about here, which was one of the things that hurt it, but something that really helped it was its qualification standard, which was a 100%. 100% of the shots fired had to strike the target. Now the target was somewhat generous as well, so that diminished that accuracy standard a little bit, but still, again, that 100% qualification requirement in this course is what boosted the Colorado course into number 5 in the overall standings. It ended up with a qualification quotient of 34.72, and again, a very well-designed course. And to be able to get into the finalists or into the number 5 position with only 25 rounds fired throughout the course really shows that a lot of thought went into designing those stages and putting together the most efficient course possible to be able to evaluate a shooter's capabilities without requiring many rounds to do that, and the associated expense to the various departments and government subdivisions in order to qualify their officers, so the money saved on ammunition and qualification can then be used for firearms training to further enhance those officers' shooting skills. So good job, Colorado, in finishing number 5 out of all 50 of the courses evaluated in the country. In 4th place is the Missouri course, and the Missouri course went the opposite direction of the Colorado course before it. As I said, Colorado required only 25 rounds for the shooter to qualify. The Missouri course uses 60 rounds in order to qualify the officers, but still only tests 11 critical shooting skills. So again, we see the individual stages of fire are designed differently in Missouri, and I think that's not necessarily the most efficient use of your ammunition. Even so, it did evaluate 11 critical skills. It had the second tightest time limit of this group of finalists. The qualification standard in Missouri was only 70%, so that time limit was what really helped it out in order to get a qualification quotient of 36.84. But the first determining factor is always the number of critical skills that are evaluated, and Missouri did come out at the top of its group of 10 with 11 critical skills evaluated. The Missouri course does have some repetition, and there is repetition, I believe, in terms of dominant and non-dominant hand shooting. There seemed to be an emphasis on that. The target used in Missouri is the B-27 target, but all the shooter's shots have to be inside of the 8 ring of the B-27 in order to count. But still, that qualification standard and the repetition is what really brought this down. If they would use some of those 60 rounds instead of repeating critical skills that have already been tested for evaluating other critical shooter skills, the Missouri course would have scored much higher. But as it is, it came in at number 4, so congratulations to those of you in Missouri for ending up 4th place out of the entire country in terms of your law enforcement handgun qualification course. In 3rd place was the Wisconsin course. And Wisconsin uses a 44-round course of fire to qualify officers in that state. And that course tests 11 different critical shooting skills. And the course is extremely complicated to administer. In fact, I again pulled out the course description. And this, I believe, is an 18-page document with all the information about the course in here, and the course itself is broken down into 3 different phases. Each one of those phases has different stages, and the different stages, or the different phases I should say, have different accuracy standards and different requirements. So it is a very complicated course, but it also does test a lot of critical shooting skills. There's an emphasis in the Wisconsin course on malfunction clearing, and there are a couple of different malfunction clearing drills that are performed during that qualification. And with all of the complications and everything aside, the course, as I said, did test quite a few different critical shooting skills. It has an accuracy standard when I average the standards for the entire course of 87.78, so a very high accuracy standard, and that resulted that along with the 2.31 seconds average seconds per shot resulted in a qualification quotient of 38, which was the differentiation, by the way, in all of the runners up, the number 5 through number 2 positions in this course, all of which tested 11 different critical shooting skills. So the difference between these courses became that qualification quotient. And Wisconsin's qualification quotient was good enough to boost it into the number 2 position. So congratulations to those of you in Wisconsin for finishing in, the number 3 spot, for finishing number 3 overall of all the different law enforcement qualification handgun courses in the country. But if I could make a suggestion, it would be to revise those instructions for your qualification course so they are easier to understand. Prior to going out and shooting these qualification courses, I would review the course description. Even so, some of them were so complicated, and Wisconsin's was one of those, that I was out on the range literally reading and rereading the stages of fire to try to make sure that I was shooting them correctly. And in one case, with the course from Maine, I actually had to go out and reshoot the entire course because I misread the instructions to begin with, shot it improperly, and then had to go back and do it the right way in order to properly demonstrate the course. So something to keep in mind when you are designing these courses is somebody is going to have to administer them, and it's going to have to be simple enough or easy enough for that person to be able to comprehend and then communicate that to the officers who are actually undergoing qualification, and those officers are going to need to be able to shoot the stage properly. When they get so complicated and so complex, that becomes very, very difficult to do. And we've arrived at the course that finished up in second place, or the first runner-up, and that is the course from Idaho. Idaho uses a 50-round course of fire, which also, as I mentioned a moment ago, evaluates 11 different critical shooter skills. It has an average of 2.2 seconds per shot and a qualification standard of 85%. And again, we see how that higher qualification standard really boosts up the qualification quotient, and that was the determining factor for Idaho being the first runner-up, or the number 2 position, rather than being rated lower as some of the other courses were, because it did have that higher qualification quotient. And if you look back through all the prior courses, you will see of those that tested 11 different critical shooting skills, Idaho did have the absolute highest qualification quotient. So again, that's why it ended up there. This was a good course. It had some well-designed stages. There was one that required shooting while moving and a reload, so that's a good example of how you can have multiple shooting skills that are accomplished on the same stage of fire and make the best use of your ammunition. Now, this was still a 50-round course, but even so, it did a very good job of evaluating a shooter's critical shooting skills, and it was good enough to be the first runner-up. So again, congratulations to those of you in Idaho for having the number 2 handgun qualification course in the country. And this brings us to the number 1 law enforcement handgun qualification course in the land. And that course comes to us from the Keystone State of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania uses a 60-round course of fire that is somewhat complex to administer. I would hate to have a large group of officers that I had to qualify using this course, but even so, it evaluates 13 critical skills, which was the most of any course in the country. And Pennsylvania had something that I think was just tremendous. In fact, I used this when I designed the Maryland course, and that is 2 different aspects throughout the course, one of which is a random challenge that the firearms instructor can give the shooter at the beginning of a stage, and the shooter has to react to that. And when they get the challenge command, rather than firing that stage, they have to verbally challenge the target. Police officer, put your hands up, don't move, drop the weapon, whatever. And then the instructor can either give a fire command, simulating that the hostile threat has now taken an action toward the officer, threatening the officer's life, and the officer fires the stage in response, or the instructor can call out compliance, meaning that the hostile threat has complied with the officer's commands and is no longer presenting a lethal threat, and the officer doesn't fire. So basically, in Pennsylvania, they've built in a judgmental aspect to their firearms qualification. I think that was very, very good. The other thing that we saw, and it's a similar idea, was with a failure drill where the officer fires out whatever the stage of fire was, and this was toward the end of the qualification, and at 2 different times the instructor calls out failure, meaning the officer's rounds in that stage failed to stop the hostile threat. So when the officer gets the failure command, that officer has to fire a final shot to the head of the target, where symbolically they would be trying to stop that threat. And again, I think that's very, very good because we see the officers having to react to things as they happen during that stage of fire rather than just robotically firing it out. I think that is just tremendous. And again, Pennsylvania was the only state that I saw with that, and I think it was great. Now, I did get some information that Pennsylvania may have changed some of that or maybe even taken some of that out. If so, I think that was a mistake. I think that was very much an important aspect of this qualification course, and it was something that helped boost it into the #1 spot. Now, we do see that the number of critical skills evaluated were what distinguished the Pennsylvania course, because the average number of seconds per shot is definitely not the tightest, and the qualification standard is not the highest. And I think particularly with regard to the 75% qualification standard, that could be raised a little bit. And the instructions and the layout of this course could be simplified a little bit. But again, I think the course as it is and as I shot it was very good. And it was definitely good enough to be the #1 law enforcement handgun qualification course in the country. So congratulations, Pennsylvania. That was a tremendous course. And I think this is a significant accomplishment. And in looking back over all 50 states, I think this was the one that really did distinguish itself head and shoulders above the others. So there you have it, folks. My pick for the best law enforcement firearms qualification course in the country. Congratulations to those of you in Pennsylvania. That is a fine course. And thank you to all of you who throughout this entire series going back for the last 2 years have helped me by sending targets and course descriptions and in some cases ammunition and loaning me firearms. I could not have accomplished this without all of your help and participation in this. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the series. I hope you got something from it. And there is going to be one more video that I make, which I'm going to call the Law Enforcement Firearms Qualification Series Retrospective. And I'm going to go back and cover some of the aspects of actually completing this project and some of the things that happened along the way, some of the unexpected things that happened, some of the things that I hoped were going to happen that never did, and ultimately just everything that went into completing this series. But that's it for this video. If you have any questions or comments, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, if you purchase anything from Optics Planet, be sure to use my discount code, which is... And if you use that discount code, it's good for 5% off anything you purchase from Optics Planet. See you next time, folks. But until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.